Hey friends, Admiral Amber here, filling you in on life, food, fun, fitness, and a whole lot more. I told you guys that I would try to make a compilation video of some of the work that I've been doing as an apprentice with the Plumber Steamfitter Union. I have officially finished my first 2 months with the union, and my first project that I've been working on is also completed. So I finally had time to sit down and compile some of the video I took while on job. So without further ado, enjoy. The first step was to take a sawzall and cut the copper lines that ran from the main water line into the old coil units. Some of these were just above head, but most of them were up in the ceiling tile, so it was hard to get a recording of. Next we had to go upstairs and cut the unit from the wall. The paint was pretty thick, so it would rip off the wall if you didn't cut all the way through first. Then we had to remove the old air filter and condensate pan and dismount the unit from the wall. Next came the fun task of actually getting the unit ripped off the wall. You gotta realize these units had been mounted to these walls for well over 50 years, so they were pretty well stuck on. And then ripping them out of the floor was also a bit of a challenge because some of these lines running to them had an offset, like a pretty large bend in them. So getting them out of the hole was a bit of a challenge. Some of them were actually impossible to get out of the freaking hole because of the offset. So we decided to just sawzall the pipes inside the unit and then deal with getting the ones out of the hole later, which was a bit of an adventure. This next step was my absolute favorite part. The new units that we received were not properly configured, so we had to sweat and solder new joints onto these units so that they would work for this project that we were working on. So it was, for me, it was a lot of fun to learn how to sweat and solder pipe. I learned how to do oxyacetylene welding in high school, and I absolutely loved that. And then my godfather had taught me how to do stick welding when I was living on the ranch, and I absolutely loved that. I'm a huge fan of metal art, so this kind of just falls right in line with that. I didn't get any video footage of actually making the fittings that we had to put on here, but I caught some pictures of what the units looked like when we first got them and how we had to configure them in the end. So this is how the units came to us, and all of the little parts that we had to assemble. We put them on the unit. This is how it would look. Then we would have to take all those parts off of it and create these pieces and finish with all of those. All in all, I thought it was a pretty fun project. Soldering is kind of like an art form, so I really enjoy creating things and building things. So this was just right up my alley, and I do hope that I get to explore more of this further in my career. After we got done soldering the units, we had to go back into the ceiling and remove the old nibbles from the main water lines. You have to realize these water lines were at least 70 years old, so some of these nipples were extremely hard to remove. Not to mention that it was like some super weird angles to try to get at these. To replace these, we weren't using hard lines, we were using flex lines, so we created a different style of nipple and installed those into the main water lines. After we set the new units in the rooms, we had to drill out holes in the bottoms of them because electrical lines had to run up through the bottoms of the units, and it did not run at the same area where it already had an opening. We also realized that the old condensate lines were too tall for the new pans in the units, so we had to measure up the exact height that these condensate pans needed to sit in the unit and cut off all of the excess piping. Alas, the end was nearing, guys, so we started dropping all of these units and hooking up the lines that we had already run. Some of these we could attach the flex line inside the unit before we dropped it, and then hook it up to the main line downstairs. But some of these, like I said, had an offset hole, so we had to fish all of the flex line through this offset hole, which was a pain in the butt. And then drop the unit on those flex lines and then have to screw them on in the unit, which there's not a whole lot of room in those, so that was a bit of a challenge. Last but not least, we had to mount the new units to the wall and install the condensate pans. Mounting these units, these walls would just strip out because they're really old brick walls. So sometimes we would have to drill out like 4 or 5 holes in different areas just to get it to mount to the wall. But that was about it for this project. I mean, after we had them all installed and put in the air filters and all that, we would test the units and make sure there was no leaks. And that's how you know that you did a good job. Anyways, I hope you guys learned a little bit of something about what you might run into if you decide to join the Plumber or Steamfitter union. Have a great day.